Okay. So, I thought a long time about what I was going to say tonight, um, because the story that I have to share is it's I don't want to say graphic, but it's pretty tough for a couple of years there, and the reason why I decided to do this is because I know that for a long time I struggled with some of these demons, and it kept me away from a lot of the things that I wanted to be a part of. And the stigma of drug addiction and things like that, um, you know, in society it's not really that rare, but I kind of feel like in church it is. And my motivation for tonight is just so I hope that maybe one person who decides to come to church can hear this and decide and hear that maybe whatever they've struggled through, they're not alone. There's people that have been through this and have made it through, and that's kind of the gist of what I want to say. So I'm gonna go in three parts, like beginning, middle, and kind of where I'm at right now. So um, the beginning is that I was born into a very normal family, mother, father, sister, all that good stuff. I was born in Nebraska, and I was raised in Wyoming. My father was a oil rig worker, and my mother was a hotel manager for several years. Normal childhood, no issues whatsoever. Um, it was pretty good actually. I have very fond memories of my early childhood. Things began to go south for me when my parents decided to get divorced because uh, I was a daddy's boy. I mean, I went everywhere with my father. I woke up in the morning. I went to work with him. I went, on jobs with him. We traveled all over the place. Everywhere he was, I was. I remember sitting in his lap watching TV, growing up. I mean, that was just what we did. And when they got divorced, my father, uh, it's kind of hard to say, but he wasn't a very strong man. So he decided that the way he was going to handle it was just kind of, take it out on us, and he just sort of abandoned us. And I went from one day walking home from school, uh, getting ready to see my dad, to being told that we're not gonna live here anymore. And we moved away down to an apartment just half a mile from our old house. So whenever I walked to school, I got to walk by my dad's house every single day. And I remember knocking on his door a couple of times, hoping he was there, and he wasn't there. So that happened. And during that time, my mother was really struggling with some things. She was drinking a lot of alcohol, and she kind of was dealing with her issues in her way. So my sister and I, for a couple of years, just pretty much just kind of raised ourselves. It was kind of a tough time, but not anything unusual for a lot of kids growing up in America today. It's not that traumatic, really. I mean, it kind of was, but it wasn't. Um, During this time, when um, dad was gone and mom was dealing with her issues that she was dealing with, this is when kind of the second punch came in. This is when my cousin, my older cousin named Johnny, who has a lot of issues growing up, this is when he started to sexually abuse me, I guess would be the easiest thing to say. I was very young. I was 7 years old. I really didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know. And, it, I don't know what you say. You're 7 years old and it's happening and you don't know. So you're dealing with that. And then also at the same time, my mother met my stepfather, who is a wonderful man. A lot of you guys have met him. He is an outstanding man. They got married, and she got pregnant and was going to have a child with him. Well, and that was, I don't know, a couple of years later, they decided that we were going to move to Oklahoma. So we moved to Oklahoma. This was about 1988, I guess. And very traumatic for me. I didn't want to leave my dad behind, even though I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and I didn't want to leave Wyoming, because it was everything that I knew. All my friends were there. And I remember the day we left, Mom picked us up, and I remember I cried from our house all the way to Oklahoma. It was about a 20-hour trip at that time, and I don't think I stopped crying the entire time. Anyways, we got to Oklahoma, and my cousin before came and stayed with us, and that continued for about another year. At that same time, my father, who I was so desperately trying to reconnect with, passed away. He was killed. He was electrocuted on an oil rig. And, any one of those things is not, kind of a life-altering event. But all those happened in a very short period of time for me. And that kind of led to going into my teenage years with a lot of self-confidence issues, self-esteem issues, a lot of guilt, a lot of, who am I, what am I about? And I didn't know how to deal with any of that kind of stuff. I didn't have any friends at this time. I didn't have any close relatives. I was just kind of on my own dealing with all of this stuff. So, what do you naturally turn to? Well, you naturally turn to something. And for me, it started my time into doing drugs when I was about 15 or so. So that's kind of how I got into doing those things, because I was just trying to cope. And I only say this because I think it's important for people to know why people decide to do those things. Most people who get into that don't do it because they just want to, I tried to explain to my father one time, who he has never done any drugs in his entire life. My stepfather, he's my father. Why people do it. And the only analogy I could ever come up with is, we all live in Oklahoma, and we know how hot it is outside. In the middle of summer, it's 110 degrees, humidity is 100%, and you're just baking, and you can't escape it no matter what you do. No matter where it's hot air when you breathe in, and you're sweating, and then that's kind of like that's what it's like for a drug addict when they're just doing their normal thing, when they're not getting high. That's kind of how you feel. When you get high and you're dealing with all these issues, it's like walking into a cold, air-conditioned room. You get that immediate relief. And that's the only thing that you can do at that time to get away from those issues and those things that you're trying to deal with. So, like I said, it's important for people to understand why I did what I did. That's kind of the setup for later in life. I mean, we kind of coasted through my teenage years, and then I met Amy Lou, which was one of the few bright spots of my life. If people don't know how we met at Garfield's Restaurant in Shawnee. She had followed a boy up here from Texas and saw me and got rid of that guy. But I was a cook there, go figure. And I remember the day that I first saw her. I was walking into Garfield's for a shift, and I was walking in, and I kind of looked back, and I saw her. I'm going to find out who that is. And so we were kind of flirting with each other, all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of how we met, and it took off from there. But all this leading up to this point, it's been not a terrible life. I was at this point, I had a lot going for me. I had a beautiful wife, and we were, Michael was born at this time, not too long after that, and things were pretty good. I was a chef at a country club in Shawnee, doing what I love to do, and things were going okay. But during all this time, we had never dealt with anything yet. I was just kind of coasting. I was still getting high all the time.
I had my own demons.
Amy had her own demons. There was a lot of alcohol, a lot of codependency, a lot of things like that. But the really tough time started for us as a couple in the really what we call D days, dark days, dope days, whatever you want to call them. When we lived in Dallas. We moved to Dallas because, there just wasn't much going on in Shawnee. And we wanted to try to get a better life for ourselves and at this time, one child. So we moved to Dallas, and I was working as a head chef of a tea room, a little cafe type thing in Fort Worth. And Amy wanted to have another baby. So I decided that I need to get another job because I'm going to have 2 kids now. So I got another job, and I started working at a barbecue restaurant. And at this point, I decided that I needed to do more than just be a chef, because chefs, unless you're famous, you don't make a lot of money. You just don't. You jump from job to job, and it's kind of tough. So I got into restaurant management is when that happened. And the company I started working for was a good company, but the hours were atrocious. I worked anywhere from 60 to 70 to 75 hours a week. All this time, Amy Lou is going through this pregnancy basically on her own. And obviously she's not doing anything, but I'm still, I'm getting high every morning before I go to work, and I stay that way because I'm trying to deal with this extremely tough job that I'm doing to support this family. But that led into, Casey being born, and this is, the year 2000, I think, right? Yeah, 2000. Yeah, that's when he was born. And when he was born, and I know Amy won't mind me saying this, she suffered from some severe postpartum depression. And me being a young father of 24 with my second kid, I had no idea what was going on. I just thought she was losing her mind. And, typical guy answer. But I just kind of went on and doing my own thing. And I just kind of left her to deal with all this stuff on her own. I thought I was doing the right thing, working hard, paying bills, that kind of thing. And she was dealing with some of her own demons. So, that led into the really, really, really bad time for us. That's when the hard drugs came into the picture. At first, I did not do them. She was going down a path. I was still working. She was going down a different path, and we ended up separating for a while. And it was just, it's just tough. You have a couple who really love each other, but they just have so much baggage and so much junk from their past that neither one of them had ever dealt with before, knew how to deal with. Or even told each other a lot of these things. So we started to continue to cope, and I won't go into all the details, but we started doing some hard drugs. So this has all happened about, I think it was the middle of 2003. I've been working for this company for almost 4 years. Done very well. We had a home, had a company truck, was making good money, had my own store, was responsible for training the managers for the entire company, and we just kind of imploded, I guess you would say. We just had 2 completely different lives. Mine was all about work, and when I came home from work, I was nothing else for her or for the boys, really. and she had to deal with the things that she dealt with and the way that she dealt with them. So we started, as we were split up, if you don't know anything, I'm sure nobody does, when you start doing, drugs like methamphetamines, it completely changes your entire perception of the world to a point where, it's just hard to explain. But what you're doing at that point seems completely legitimate and the right thing to do, even though it is damaging to your entire family. So over the course of the next year or so, I don't even think it was a year, it got worse. We started doing lots and lots of drugs. We started selling drugs. We started, we were dealing drugs to pay for our own thing. I quit my job. I moved back into the house. We were unemployed. We had 2 kids at this point. It was just a very, very bad situation that continued to get worse for us as a couple. We got back together, and thank you. You want to come up here with me? Well, you don't need to. I got it. And we were only separated for a short time. We got back together, but like I said, it wasn't really. There was nothing healthy about it. We were still doing drugs. We were homeless. We were selling them to pay for our own habit and trying to make enough money to pay the bills, which didn't happen. During this time, Amy Lou got pregnant with our 3rd child, Cassidy. And to this day, you'll understand why, I have called Cassidy our miracle baby, and I'll tell you why. I love all 3 of my children. You guys all know all 3 of my children. I think they're fantastic boys. Cassidy is our miracle child because when Cassidy was born, because of the way that it works in Texas, they immediately tested the mother and the child for drugs, and of course tested positive because that's what we were doing at that time. So that started the CPS, Child Protective Services, battle of our lives. We decided we were going to try to run for it to the big city of Abilene. And when we were there, CPS was still involved and ended up taking all 3 of our children away from us at that point. And the really sad part is as traumatic as that was and is, we still didn't stop getting high because we had another problem we couldn't deal with. So there's a lot more details in this. I'm just kind of skimming over. I know Amy Lou's chomping at the bit for more details, but we came back to Dallas, and we continued to get high, and we were dealing with the kids being in foster care, and we had kind of made some attempts to kind of stop and get clean and things, but it just drags you back in. You don't have any money. You don't. You just can't cope with it. You don't know how to cope with it. So they were in foster care. They were split up. Michael and Casey went with one foster care, and Cassidy, who was a baby, went with another parent. And this went on for not too long, just a couple of months. And my parents, as wonderful as they are, they decided that they can't deal with this. So what they did is they went and they got all of their certifications or whatever, and they went and got the kids, Michael and Casey, and took them up here to Oklahoma to live with them, while Cassidy was still in foster care. And at this point, we had done as much damage as a couple can do to each other and to our family. It really doesn't get any worse than this. I mean, there were times when, before they took Cassidy away, we had dealers show up at our house, slapping people around and things. It was a pretty dark time. But we had done about as much damage as you can. And at this point, we were homeless. We were staying at different dope houses and things like that. And we were we split up. We got to get back together. We split up, all that kind of stuff. And the beginning of the end of this time started with Amy Lou. We were staying at a friend's house apartment in Texas, and she had been studying her Bible pretty intensely for quite a while at this time, and she woke up one morning, and I know I'm going to butcher this story, but she has to deal with it. She woke up one morning, and she decided that she needs to check herself into rehab because she can't deal with this anymore. And so we got up, and we drove. We were in Louisville. We drove all the way to Fort Worth to this rehab, and they took 10 people, and she was number 11 in line. And as we're standing there, she's determined, she's resolved. She stood there in line, and right down there, praying, right down there to the bitter end, one person got out. So she was number 10. So she got in. And that is the last time that Amy Lou did drugs. She stayed in that rehab 3 weeks? 21 days. During this time, I decided I'm gonna do the same thing. Then I'm not gonna do the rehab because I'm too good for that. So I'm gonna do this on my own. So I'm dealing with the caseworker at this time on my own. She's dealing with the caseworker on her own, and we're both working this program. I tried to work this program, and if you ever have any dealings with protective services or anything like that, it all comes down to your caseworker. We had one she was terrible. She gave me a couple of phone numbers and told me to handle it myself. So I tried. Came into a few roadblocks. I'd visited Amy Lou in rehab. At this point, she had decided, she was clean at this point, and she had come back around to normal way of thinking. And she looked me in my eye, and she told me that she did not want to be with me anymore. And I understand why she said that, because I was still out getting high, destroying my life, and she was moving forward. And so kind of fast forward a little bit, she gets out of rehab. She meets a person, a friend in rehab named Toy. And she gets out. I go to meet her, and I'm still doing whatever it is that I was doing. And she was not. And she said she was going to, the way I remember it, maybe go stay with Toy in Bonham, Texas. Maybe. And okay, do your thing. Tough guy. And she leaves. She's gone. And I'm still in Dallas, Arlington, Texas, and I'm still doing my thing. So she's wherever she is, and this is only a couple of weeks' time. But I remember my path to getting off drugs started with, I was at the end of probably a 7-day binge, you would say. I hadn't slept in 7 days. I hadn't eaten in 7 days. I had been doing this nonstop because I wanted to die at this point. I truly wanted to die. She was gone. The kids were in foster care. Cassidy was in another foster care. We had battled all these things, and I was done. I didn't want to be around anymore. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to be part of it. I could not cope anymore. And I tried to kill myself several times. I remember one particular instance. We back up just a little bit. Her and I were home, and some people came over, and it wasn't a good confrontation, and we got into an argument. And I remember we had a pistol in the house, and I held that gun to my head, and I pulled that trigger, and it clicked. Nothing happened, obviously. I took that gun, I put it down, and it fired, and the bullet ricocheted off the floor into the wall somewhere. That's how close I was. I wanted to not be around anymore. So she's gone. I'm trying to kill myself. I wake up one morning in a dope house, would be the best thing you could call it. It's just a house, in circles when you run in these types of people, very few people have homes. So I wake up and there's literally 20 people passed out in various stages of intoxication and being high. And I'd finally slept for the first time in a week, and I woke up and I looked around, and there was something different about that day. Something told me that this is enough. This is it. And I have to get my life back together. If it's going to be any day, it's going to be today. I don't know why God picked that day, but he did. So I got up and I packed the few things that I had in this little rinky-dink backpack.
We still have it.
I will never get rid of that backpack. And my plan was I'm going to go find Amy Lou, because that's my first thing. Because she's sober, I want to be sober, and I want to get my family back together. So I did the only thing I could do. I put my backpack on and I walked to another acquaintance's house, an old man, and it's not important who he is, but I borrowed $20 off of him. And I called Greyhound and bought a bus ticket to Sherman, Texas, because buses don't run to Bonham. And the bus ticket cost $14. So I had $6 left in my pocket. So I get a ride to the bus station. And I remember I go to the bathroom, and I have a little bit of drugs left. And I remember in that Greyhound bus station bathroom, I took my needle, I took my spoon, I took everything, and I threw it in the trash can. And I got on that bus, and I went to Dallas. This was in Arlington, and I went to Dallas, and I had a layover in Dallas. And I remember sleeping in the bus station in Dallas for about 3 hours, waiting on my next bus before it took me to Sherman. And I got on that bus going to Sherman, and remember, I don't know for sure if she's in Bonham, so this is kind of a shot in the dark. My plan is I got enough money to get to Sherman. I'm going to figure out how to get to Bonham. And if I get to Bonham and she's not there, well, then I'm going to have to find a way to Oklahoma City, because that's where my parents are, and that's my last hope. My parents very wisely had just kind of cut off relationships with me. They did not want to enable. They were taking care of my two children. So that's the only option I had. So I remember getting on that bus, and I was driving to Sherman, and it was, it's like a 45-minute bus drive, but it seemed like 6 hours. I slept on that bus. I felt like I slept for 8 hours. Because remember, I'd barely slept in 7 days, but truthfully, I'd barely slept or ate in the past year. I was very, I don't even believe it, but I was very thin. I was about 180 pounds, which for me is like anorexic. You could count my ribs. It's hard to believe, but it happened. So there I was. I had a full head of hair, and I was skinny. Yeah, right. And I remember I got pulled into Sherman, and I remember I looked at a map, and I knew that Bonham was on this highway, and it was this direction.
So I remember I got off the bus and I walked to the bus driver and I said, where's this highway, such and such? He said, it's about 2 miles that way. So I said, okay, this is nighttime. This is in November of 2004, and it's probably 7:30 at night, and it's cold. I mean, it's really, really cold. And so I get out and I start walking, and I went to a gas station and bought a pack of cigarettes, a Snickers bar, and a bottle of water. And I had $1.38 left, and that's important. I'll tell you why here in a minute. So I had my cigarettes, I had my Snickers bar, and I had my bottled water. This is the first food that I'd eaten in, I don't know how many days, maybe a couple of weeks, I don't know. So I downed that Snickers bar, drank some of the water, and I started walking. And I got up to the highway, and in my mind I was thinking Bonham was, kind of right down the street. But I remember turning down this dark highway and walking down and seeing the sign that said Bonham 26 miles. What do you do? So I start walking. And, during this time, all these memories of these past few years are going through my mind. And, I don't know if this woman is here, and I don't know if she's even going to talk to me when I see her. So I start walking, and it starts raining. And I've never hitchhiked in my life, but I stuck that thumb out. I'm just like, I don't. To this day, when I tell this story, the whole process of getting to where I'm at this point, it was like I was being pushed. This was not conscious decisions on my part. So I didn't know how to hitchhike. You saw a movie, so I stuck my thumb out. I didn't even know if that was really a thing. You know what I mean? I didn't know. So, a few cars pass by, and I'm just like, whatever. Well, then this pickup truck stops. And this is a moment for me, because I'm like, do I get into this car or not? It's raining, and it's raining hard, and it's about 30 degrees or 35 degrees, and there was a little bit of ice or whatever, and I'm like, it's 26 miles or get in this car with a stranger. So, I'm a pretty tough guy. I could probably handle it. So I get in the truck, and it's this older gentleman, and he asked me where I'm going, and I said, I'm going to Bonham. He said, good, that's where I live. So over the next 20 minutes while we're driving, he tells me that he's ex-Air Force. He was a retired Air Force general, actually. And he thought, by the way I looked, that I was a soldier that was needing help. And I told him, no, sorry. I said, and I kind of told him briefly, I said, I'm trying to get to Bonham. I'm trying to find my wife, trying to reconcile and kind of get my life on track. Didn't tell him too much, but I told him that. And he said, do you know where she's at? I said, man, I don't have a clue. I just hope she's here in this town. And I don't know. And then it hit me. Am I going to knock on every door? What am I going to do? I don't know. Stand in the middle of town and say, help find, somebody find me. I don't know. So we get into Bonham, and he's like, I'll tell you what. He said, if she's here for recovery, she's going to be at this recovery place. That's probably the only place that she is. And I said, okay, well, I appreciate you. He said, where are you going to sleep tonight? I was like, I don't know. He said, well, if you want to, you can sleep in my house. And you would think, oh, that's neat. My mind, what's his motivation? So I had no other option, So I go, and he was a super nice man. He was very warm. And the craziest thing is he picks this stranger up, brings him to his house. We go into the house. He offers me a Diet Coke, which everybody knows is the only thing that I drink. Even then, when I was, skinny. He offers me a Diet Coke, tells me to take anything in the house I want to eat, and he goes in his room and he locks the door. What kind of people do that? What kind of people take a stranger off the road and just... So I'm still nervous at this point, so I go upstairs to where I'm supposed to be sleeping. I don't even take my shoes off. I sleep fully clothed on top of the covers, facing the door. Because you got to remember, the world I just came from is not nice people, you know. And so we wake up the next morning, and he asked me what my plan is, and I said, I don't know. He said, well, I'm going to take you to this place where she may or may not be. So he drives me over there. He gives me his business card, shakes my hand. He says, good luck. And I thank him. And I go to this drug rehab place. It's outpatient. It's there, you know, nobody stays there, and it's not open yet. So I walk down to Brahms. You know, I'm hungry. So I walk in there, and they have breakfast burritos. Guess how much they cost? $1.38. Takes every last penny I have, and I eat that burrito, and I enjoy every minute of it. And I remember it being in the bathroom of Brahms. I was washing my face, and it was just, you know, a small town. It was dirty and whatever. So I put my backpack back on, and I walk back up to, it's raining again, and I walk back up to this place, and I go inside to talk to the people. And I knew nothing about drug rehab world. So I go and I asked the lady, I was like, do you have an Amy Lou here? And she's like, I'm sorry, I can't give out any information about anything. And I'm like, okay, well, if you do, let her know that Brandon is looking for her. So I go back outside, and I'm sitting in the little porch thing there, and I'm just, you know, what do you do now? I don't have a clue. So as I'm about to leave and walk to Oklahoma, because I don't think she's here at this point, you know. The lady acted like she'd never heard of her. The lady comes out, opens the door, and she says, well, come here for a second. So I go inside, and she hands me the phone. And I say, hello, and what do I hear? Bear? She had called Amy Lou for me to let her know that I was there. And Amy Lou was very reluctant at this point, which I understand. I walked down to meet her, and she had our only car, and it just so happened that at this point, they had some flat tires. She was going to Dallas that very day, and I would have never seen her. But she had 2 flat tires, so she was stuck in Bonham. And we had a reunion. It was kind of sketchy at first, but once she realized that I was serious about not having that lifestyle anymore, we spent the next 4 or 5 months truly kind of reconnecting with each other. We had no kids. We got jobs. We went to AA meetings. We went to NA meetings 4, 5, 7 times a week. We went to drug counseling. We parenting classes. But while this was happening, we got a new caseworker. She just came into Texas, and we were doing our visitations with the boys. Let me tell you something. When you're sober and you look back on the damage you've done, and you have to go visit your kids, and you're told when you can and how, and then it tears your soul out at this point. And then they have to leave because you only get an hour a week with these boys that you raised, basically. And they would run into the visitation room and hugs and kisses, and it was just wrong because there she was watching us play with our own children, you know, and it was just, it was too much. And we got this new caseworker, and she had just came into Dallas, took over, I don't know how many cases she had, but she had ours. And this woman was phenomenal. She lined up all of our classes for us. She got us enrolled in everything. She just took over and did it, basically. All we had to do was show up. And we were living with Toy Broadway, was her name. She has passed away from drugs. We had finally started to get our lives together. I was working as a assistant head chef at a cafe there in Bonham. quit that job because the ownership got bought out. So I needed a job. Well, I remember I pulled out the card from the gentleman who rescued me from the highway. He just so happened to be the administrator for a veterans retirement home in Bonham. So I walked in there and asked him if I could have a job, and I got a job. And a very good job at this point. So fast forward a little bit, we had gone to classes, we were going to court, trying to get our boys back, going to visitations, first with my parents, and then we'd drive to go see Cassidy, and he was started walking at this point. We'd missed all that, and we transferred all of our cases to Bonham, and we went to our final court, not our final court hearing, but one of the final court hearings, where we actually won the right to have our children come back to us. They did it one at a time. First came back Cassidy, he was a little baby, and Amy Lou and I, we still kind of half joke but half serious. All of a sudden this kid's back in your life, and you're just barely 5 months sober. What do you do? He's a stranger to you almost at this point. And so we had a month with him, and then they brought back Casey, and then finally they brought back Michael on June 7th of 2005. At this point, I needed to get a better job. And Amy Lou had been bugging me that I should apply at Chuck E. Cheese.
I was praying. Oh my goodness, I was praying.
And so I started working. I was working at Walmart as an overnight stalker, and I was pestering the district manager of Chuck E. Cheese to let me have an interview. Well, the day that they brought Michael back, my parents are there, all three boys are there, the caseworker's there. I get a phone call from him. He's like, I'm going to be in Sherman, which is where the Chuck E. Cheese was. He's going to be here for about another hour. And if you have time, let's come in and let's talk. So, we had nothing at this point. We'd lost everything. We had a few clothes, but, when we had our mass exodus from Dallas, we lost everything. All of our clothes, all of our pictures. We had saved a few pictures, but all the toys, furniture, everything. And there's so many more little stories about all that. But I drove to Sherman, and I interviewed with this guy, and I thought I had bombed it because, be honest with you, I lied to him because I didn't know how to tell him that over the past year and a half, I didn't have a job. So how do you make up for that? How do you go from being, a general manager of in Dallas, Fort Worth to nothing for a year and a half? And so he told me I did well, and so I accepted the job. And then they called me and told me that I had to go live in Dallas for 5 weeks for training. And we didn't know if we could handle that because it's right back there in the middle of all those people and all those things and all those places. But we did, and a year later, I became general manager of the Chuck E. Cheese in Abilene, and
Miraculous stories there too.
yes, and then we moved from there to Oklahoma in 2008. Took over the store here, and I went from making almost nothing to making almost something, and 4 years later, we bought our first house. And the day, November 4th of 2004, was the day that we officially closed our case with Child Protective Services. We didn't go because our lawyers told us there's no need to. That's the day that we moved from Bonham to Abilene. And that move was significant because it was the first time in a year and a half that we didn't have to report where we were going to anybody. We packed our kids and we moved where we wanted to. And we are here now. And a lot of you know the story about how I became a Seventh-day Adventist. But the point of all this is through that whole time, you know, it sounds cliche, but God really just, you know, he just kind of, you know, this is where you're going to be. And no matter how hard I tried, it's like, you know, a bowling ball with bumpers. I kept trying to go in the gutter, and he just kept throwing me back in. He was not going to let me fail. He was not. He wanted me to be where I am now. And for me, but I believe it's for those boys. But, you know, to go from where I was, homeless, sticking needles in my arm, kids in child protective services, you know, just getting roughed up by drug dealers, trying to kill myself, you know, and just a few years later, it's like none of it had happened. And to go from that to that, if you look at that story and you know that story and you don't believe in God, then man, I got nothing for you, because it was all 100% him. And I tell this story apprehensively because I think I'm at a point in my life where people know me well enough to know what I am now. And I want people to know that there are people that come in this church that are where we were at those years ago. And if they know that there are people who can come out of that, and they know that there are people in this world that will take care of them and love them just the same, then maybe that will encourage somebody. Maybe that one person will come back to church knowing that you as a church family has accepted me and all this junky baggage that you now know that nobody knew before. Surprise! Stuck with me now. I'm not going anywhere. But, you know, Amy Lou and I have spent a lot of years telling this story to a lot of other people. But, you know, this church family, which is so precious to us, and the friends that we have now mean so much to us, that we were apprehensive because we didn't want their opinion to change of who we are. And, you know, I came to terms with that because I realized that, number one, it's just not a good way to think. Two, if I lose any friends or acquaintances or people, you know, turn down the hallway when I walk now, then I don't need those people in my life anyways. But it's not about me in that. It's about being able to tell this story to encourage just one person, you know, like a Jackie or Curtis or a Mike that has issues, that wants to be part of this and have what we have, but they're too worried of the stigma of their past or the issues that they're still dealing with. And I just want them to know that God can do whatever he wants, but he can do all of that for us and keep us together for 21 years and have this wonderful, beautiful family, both at home and outside of the home that we have, and all the things that we have and all the things that we get to do and be a part of. The richness that life is now is because we surrendered and we turned over and we decided that it's God's way, it ain't our way. Amen. And that is my story.
If I just hold it like this, is this okay for a minute? Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming out, and thank you, Brandon, for braving all of us and sharing that. And I agree with you. You know, there are people that come into this church maybe on a weekly basis that are struggling with these things, or maybe they've struggled in the past and they don't want anyone to know because they're scared of what people might think of who they used to be. But, you know, isn't that what Christianity is all about? Christ taking broken, sinful, messed up people and using them in spite of that and changing them into someone new. That's the beauty of Christianity, and I look forward to finding out more about many of you, maybe things that we didn't know that can be helpful to, like Brandon said, even if it's just one other person that needed to hear that story. It's worth it. It's enough. So next month, the What's Your Story is going to be falling on Valentine's Day. And so I know some of you might have plans already. Maybe you have reservations somewhere. That's okay. But we're still going to be having What's Your Story. And we're planning to do something a little special afterwards. We've got two different possibilities going, but it will involve some refreshments and food, maybe even a full meal. We'll work on that and get the information out in the next week or two for sure. But then also, in terms of who is going to be sharing, that's still out there. I'm working on it. Hopefully, maybe by this Sabbath, I will be able to give you a solid answer. But I'm trying to get a couple up here. So it'll be a little different. It'll be a little special for Valentine's Day. But that's what I want this to be about. And just, you know, I want you all to know once again that if you've got something different, maybe you want to share different, do something, maybe bring your whole family up here or bring a couple people up here, that's fine. Just come talk to me. You know, so far we had Jasmine come up here and tell her story just sitting up here on her own. And then last month, you know, Marcus wanted me to interview him, and now we had Brandon not sitting but walking around, and you know, we can do all sorts of different things. So thank you guys once again for coming. Let's close out with prayer, and then you guys can go home, sit around, mingle for a little bit, whatever you want to do. All right, let's bow our heads. Our loving, gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you so much for all that you do, that you love us in spite of ourselves, that you forgive us in spite of our sins, even the ones that we keep doing over and over and over. You do all of this because you are our God. You're our Creator, and you love us. And Lord, we are so grateful to have a God like you and to have a Savior like you that was willing to die that we could become new creations, that we could live eternally with you. And so, Lord, give us courage and help us to never have fear when it comes to sharing about our past, telling our story, giving our testimony, because you can use our past. You can use our stories and our testimonies to reach other people and to give them a glimpse of your love. Lord, give us traveling mercies as we go home tonight, and bring us all safely back together this Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen.